At 19, they sold me like meat at glittering parties. Drugs, cancer, and a pact with death dragged me into the abyss. But today, 70 years later, I'm here to tell you how I escaped the hell that nearly devoured me. Before I open my broken heart, I ask you, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. Every subscription gives a voice to women like me who survived the silence. Join us in honoring these stories of pain and hope. My dears, pull up a chair, and I'll tell you my life story, one that carries the weight of many years and the taste of many tears. Today, in my 70s, I look back and see a girl who dreamed of flying far away, but who carried an emptiness bigger than the world. My name is Eleanor. Though in my youth I was known by other names, depending on the state or the stage. But let's start at the beginning. In a small town I'll call Harmony Creek, a forgotten corner in rural Kentucky, where the sun bakes, the land and dreams seem to get stuck in the dusty streets. I was born into a simple family, the kind that struggles day to day to put food on the table. My parents were traveling salespeople, always on the road, selling shoes from one county to another. Dad, Mr. Anderson, had a loud laugh, but I rarely heard it. Mom, Mrs. Anderson, was quiet, with eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. They weren't home much, always on the road, and I, barely 6 or 7, stayed with my grandmother, a strong Native American woman who had 14 children and knew how to tell stories that made the night less lonely. But even her tales couldn't fill the hole I felt in my chest. It was as if a piece of me was missing, as if my parents' love was a luxury they couldn't afford to give me. In Harmony Creek, life was simple, but for me, it was a cage. From a young age, I dreamed of getting out of there, of speaking French, of being someone. I wanted to be a basketball player, or maybe a supermodel, walking bright runways under lights that made me forget the dust of my town. But every time I told Mom or Dad my dreams, they would frown. "That's not for us, Eleanor," Mom would say. "Better study, do something useful." Dad just grunted, as if my words were a whim. But their words didn't stop me. On the contrary, they made me more rebellious. If they told me I couldn't, I promised myself I would, no matter the cost. At 14, I was already tall, with the tanned skin I inherited from my Native American grandmother, and eyes full of fire. I started participating in local pageants, those small-town festivals where everyone knows everyone. I won a beauty contest in Harmony Creek, and when they placed the crown on my head, I felt the world open up a little. People looked at me differently, as if they finally saw me. But at home, nothing changed. Dad said those things were vanity, and Mom just sighed, as if I were committing a sin. My brother Samuel was different, more reserved, always with a book in his hand. He didn't interfere with my dreams, but he didn't understand them either. We were like two separate worlds under the same roof. At 17, I couldn't take it anymore. The emptiness in my heart was like a scream that wouldn't stop, and Harmony Creek felt smaller and smaller. I fought with my parents one night, after Mom told me I should marry a good man from town soon. "I don't want that life," I shouted, and without much thought, I grabbed a backpack, some money I'd saved, and left. I didn't know where, but I had a boyfriend who promised to take me to New York City, where everything would be different. He was older, with big promises, and a smile that made me believe the world could be mine. I was young, foolish, and desperate for love. The trip to New York City was like a dream at first. The bustling streets, the bright lights, the smell of street food. But soon everything fell apart. That boyfriend, who said he loved me, abandoned me when the money ran out. I contracted a serious infection, the kind that makes you feel like life is slipping away. I was sick, penniless, and suddenly I found myself on the street with my bags, trembling with cold and fear. I remember the damp smell of the city, the sound of cars passing, and the feeling that no one in the world knew I existed. It was the first time I felt the real weight of loneliness, as if the ground were opening beneath my feet. Then a woman approached. Her name was Sophia. She had dyed red hair and a soft voice. She offered me a place to stay, food, a job. She said it was a massage parlor, something simple, just helping people relax. Desperate, I accepted without hesitation. But soon I discovered the truth. It wasn't just massages. There was a happy ending that clients expected, and I, without realizing it, had fallen into a world I didn't understand. At first I refused, but Sophia told me, "Look, kid, that's how life is here. If you want to eat, you have to play the game." And I, who had nothing else, played. That was the beginning of a dark path. From New York, I went to Los Angeles, then to Miami, to Las Vegas, to Chicago. Each city was a new stage, but the story was the same. I became a model, walking for brands that promised to make me famous. But there was always a price. My body, my dignity. They told me it was normal, that everyone did it, and I, little by little, convinced myself it was true. The money started to pour in, a lot of money. More than I had ever seen in Harmony Creek. But every dollar I earned made me feel emptier. It was as if I was selling pieces of my soul, and I didn't know how to stop. I remember a night in Los Angeles, looking out the window of an expensive hotel, wearing a dress that cost more than my parents' house. Outside, the lights glittered, but inside me, everything was dark. I wondered, is this what I wanted? Is this being someone? The answer was a knot in my throat that wouldn't let me breathe. But I couldn't go back. I had gone too far, and the world I left in Harmony Creek seemed a distant dream, as if that dreaming girl had never existed. I kept going, my dears, because life didn't give me time to stop. After New York, the world opened up like a fan. But each fold brought a new challenge, a new piece of me that I left behind. From Los Angeles, I went to Miami, with its historic streets and glamorous vibe, where the smell of Cuban coffee and the sound of salsa music made me feel like I was in a dream. But it wasn't a beautiful dream, no. It was like walking on a stage where everyone applauded, but no one saw the weariness in my eyes. I became a real model, walking for brands that promised to make me a star. My face appeared on billboards. My name, or the names I used, began to circulate in important circles. But there was always a price, one that wasn't paid with money. In Miami, I met a man, Richard, an agent who claimed to have contacts everywhere. He was tall, with a smile that seemed sincere, but his eyes were always calculating. He promised me the sky, fashion shows in Paris, contracts in London, maybe even Hollywood. I, barely 19, believed every word. But Richard was no fairy tale knight. He took me to parties where the lights were bright, but the conversations were dark. There, between champagne glasses and fake laughter, I understood what they really expected of me. It wasn't just modeling, it wasn't just smiling for the cameras. It was giving my body, again and again, to men who paid for a piece of me. At first I resisted, but Richard told me, "Eleanor, that's this world. If you want to shine, you have to give in." And I, who wanted to shine more than anything, gave in. From Miami, I went to Las Vegas, then to Chicago, to Seattle, to Tokyo. Each city was a new chapter, but the story was the same. I walked runways, posed for photos, and then, in the gloom of luxurious hotels, I did what they asked. I earned money, a lot of money. Sometimes in a single night, I earned what my parents didn't see in a year. but every dollar I touched burned my soul. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the girl from Harmony Creek. My tanned skin, which once made me proud, I now covered with makeup to look like someone I wasn't. I wore green, blue contact lenses, anything to distance myself from myself. But the emptiness in my chest grew, like a bottomless pit. In Tokyo, I lived in an apartment with sky views, but I felt trapped. I remember the smell of cherry blossoms in the streets, the constant noise of the city, and how all that made me feel more alone. I started using drugs to endure the nights, to forget the hands that touched my body, to silence the voice in my head that told me I was losing my soul. At first, it was just something to relax me, but soon it became an addiction. I couldn't go a day without something to numb me, to make me forget who I was. And then, searching for answers, I fell into another abyss, the occult. I started consulting tarot, talking to psychics, doing rituals that promised to give me control over my life. But there was no control, just more fear, more emptiness. I remember a night in Las Vegas, sitting in a bar with red lights, looking at the cards a woman read for me. She told me, "You have a great destiny, but you are lost." Her words cut into me like a knife. I knew she was right, but I didn't know how to get out of that labyrinth. Every step I took led me further from the girl who dreamed of flying and closer to a precipice I couldn't see. I became an expert at lying, at smiling when I wanted to scream, at being who others wanted me to be. But every lie cost me a piece of myself. In my 20s, I arrived in Dubai, the city of golden dreams. I lived in a building so tall it seemed to touch the clouds, with breathtaking views. I walked for famous brands, won beauty titles, even appeared in a reality TV show. Everyone looked at me, but I felt invisible. The money kept coming, thousands an hour, but it wasn't enough. Nothing was. The drugs got heavier, the nights longer, and the emptiness in my heart turned into a scream I couldn't ignore. I started having dark thoughts, ideas of ending everything. I looked out the window of my apartment, so high up, and wondered if it would be easier to just fall. One night, after a party where everyone applauded my beauty, I returned to my apartment and collapsed. I cried until there was nothing left inside me. I remembered my grandmother, her stories, her soft voice. I remembered my mother, who, despite everything, wrote me letters I never answered. I felt dirty, broken, as if I didn't deserve to live. But something in me, a small spark, wouldn't extinguish. I don't know if it was God or my own stubbornness, but something told me it wasn't the end yet. However, I wasn't ready to listen. I still had to fall deeper before finding the light. In Dubai, my dears, I touched the sky with my hands, but my heart was on the ground. I lived in an apartment that looked like something out of a fairy tale, with windows that showed a city of lights and gold. The smell of expensive perfumes filled the air, and the sound of luxury cars echoed below, a constant reminder that I was at the center of the world. I won beauty titles. Twice I was crowned the most beautiful in an international competition, and I walked for brands that made anyone dream. My face appeared in magazines, on screens, even in a reality TV show where I played a woman who, ironically, had everything under control. But the truth, the one no one saw, was that I controlled nothing. The money came like water. Sometimes, in a single hour, I earned what an ordinary person wouldn't see in months. But every dollar weighed on me more. It was as if every dollar that entered my account took a piece of my soul. The parties in Dubai were a spectacle. Champagne that cost fortunes, men in impeccable suits, women who glittered like jewels, but behind the smiles, it was all a game. They asked me for things that made me feel dirty, things I don't want to name because they still burn when I remember them. And I, who wanted to be someone, let myself be carried away. I told myself it was normal that everyone did it, that it was the price of success. Drugs became my refuge. At first, they were just for parties to endure the long nights. But soon I needed them to wake up, to smile, to exist. The white powder, the pills, anything to numb me. I remember the bitter taste in my throat, the buzzing in my head, and how, for a moment, everything seemed lighter. But when the effect wore off, the emptiness returned bigger, like a monster feeding on me. And then, looking for something to fill that void, I sank deeper into the occult. I consulted tarot every day, sometimes twice a day. I spent fortunes on psychics, on rituals, on candles that promised to give me peace. But peace didn't come. There was only more fear, more questions, more darkness. One night in my apartment, I sat in front of a huge mirror, one of those that covered the whole wall. I took off my makeup, my contact lenses, my expensive dress, and there, in front of my bare face, I didn't recognize myself. My eyes, which once sparkled with dreams, were dull. My skin, which used to be my pride, looked tired, as if it carried years it didn't have. I asked myself, "Who are you, Eleanor? What's left of you?" And the answer was a silence that hurt more than any words. I started having dark thoughts, ideas that perhaps the world would be better off without me. I looked out the window so high up and imagined myself falling. I don't know how I didn't do it, but something, a force I didn't understand, kept me alive. Then, life dealt me another blow. During a trip back to the United States to visit my mother, who kept writing me letters I barely read, I felt unwell, a pain in my neck, a fatigue I couldn't explain. I went to the doctor thinking it was just exhaustion, but the doctor's words were like thunder. "You have a tumor on your thyroid. It's cancer." I felt the ground open beneath my feet. Cancer. The word echoed in my head like a sentence. I was just over 30, and suddenly, death was in front of me, staring into my eyes. I remember the smell of disinfectant in the office, the sound of my own heart beating hard, and the feeling that everything I had built, the money, the fame, the titles, was useless. I returned to Dubai after surgery, with a scar on my neck that reminded me of my fragility. But I wasn't healed, not in my soul. The depression grew heavier, like a shadow that followed me everywhere. I no longer went to parties, no longer walked with the same energy. I locked myself in my apartment, looking at the city lights that once fascinated me, but now only made me feel alone. I continued with tarot, seeking answers, but the cards told me nothing new. I felt trapped, as if my life was a dead end. And then, one night, I hit rock bottom. I was alone in my apartment, with a bottle of wine and a handful of pills in my hand. I knelt on the floor, crying, and looked up at the ceiling. Though I only saw the roof, I screamed, with a rage that came from the deepest part of me. "God, if you exist, either take my life or I will." I don't know why I said that, but it was as if all the pain, all the shame, all the emptiness poured out of me in that scream. I stayed there trembling, waiting for something, anything. There were no thunder or lights, but I felt something different, like a whisper in my heart. I didn't understand it then, but now I know it was the beginning of something new. That night, my dears, when I knelt and challenged God, it was as if the world stood still. I was broken, lost, my heart shattered. The apartment in Dubai with Its bright lights and expensive furniture was nothing more than a gilded cage. The smell of expensive perfume still lingered in the air, but to me, everything smelled of emptiness. My hands trembled, holding those pills that seemed to promise an easy way out. But something, I don't know what, stopped me. Perhaps it was the voice of my Native American grandmother, who told me stories of spirits that never give up. Perhaps it was my mother, who, though far away, kept praying for me, as I later learned. Or perhaps it was God, who was already there, waiting for me to see him. After that scream, I stayed on the floor, crying until there was nothing left. There were no lightning bolts or grand signs, but something changed inside me. It was as if a small, almost invisible spark ignited in my chest. I didn't understand what it was, but for the first time in years, I didn't take the pills. I dragged myself to bed, exhausted, and slept as I hadn't slept in a long time. The next day, I didn't go to work. I couldn't. The idea of putting on another sparkling dress, of smiling for the cameras, of letting strange hands touch my body, made me sick. I was tired of lying, of pretending, of being someone I wasn't. Then something curious happened. I found a video online, one of those that pop up without you looking for them. It was a sermon, a woman talking about a God who loved even those who felt dirty. Her words hit me hard, as if someone had opened a window in a dark room. I started watching more videos, one after another, as if I were starved. They spoke of a Jesus who didn't judge, who didn't look at my past, who only wanted my heart. But I wasn't ready to believe. I had spent years seeking answers in tarot cards, in rituals, in things that promised to fill the void, and nothing had worked. Why would this be different? Still, I couldn't stop. I ordered a Bible, but I didn't want anyone to know. In Dubai, where everyone seemed to know me, I was ashamed. I ordered it online, with a cover that looked like any other book, with a drawing of a lion. When it arrived, I hid it under the bed, as if it were a secret. But every night after closing the curtains, I would take it out and read. At first, I didn't understand much. The words were strange, but there was something about them that made me feel different. I read about a God who forgave, who sought the lost, who loved unconditionally. And I, who felt like the most lost person in the world, began to wonder if that was for me. I locked myself in that apartment for weeks. I didn't go out, didn't answer the phone, didn't see anyone. I fasted, though I didn't quite know why. I only ate enough to stay alive, and spent hours reading, crying, talking to that God I couldn't see, but who I was beginning to feel. I remember the silence of my apartment, broken only by the sound of my own voice, whispering clumsy prayers. If you're there, help me. I don't know who I am. I don't know how to go on. It was as if for the first time, I was being honest with myself. One night I had a dream. I saw a man in a white robe, with a look I can't explain. He didn't say much, but his presence was like a warm embrace, like the one I never received from my parents. He told me without words that everything would be okay. I woke up crying, but not from sadness. It was a peace I had never felt before, as if someone had lifted a weight from my shoulders. At that moment, I knew I had to change. I couldn't keep living as before. I couldn't keep lying, or selling my body, or seeking answers in things that only harmed me. But it wasn't easy. Just when I decided to leave everything, offers came that I had never had before. $1 million contracts, invitations to events any model would dream of. It was as if the world was tempting me, saying, "Stay, Eleanor. This is what you wanted." But something inside me, that spark that had been born, told me no. I heard a voice in my heart, clear as day. give it all up. And though I trembled with fear, I said yes. I cancelled the contracts, threw out the drugs, burned the tarot cards. I called my mother after years of not speaking and told her I was coming back to the United States. The journey back was like leaving a world behind. I left the apartment in Dubai, the lights, the money, everything I had built. It wasn't easy. There were nights when I doubted, when fear told me I was crazy to give up so much. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man from the dream, and I felt that inexplicable peace. When I arrived back in the United States, I wasn't the same. The Eleanor who had left Harmony Creek, full of dreams and rebellion, no longer existed, but neither was I the broken woman from Dubai. I was someone new, someone who was beginning to discover who she really was. When I stepped onto American soil again, my dears, I felt the ground was different. It wasn't just the warm earth of Harmony Creek, nor the smell of coffee that floated in the air. It was as if for the first time I was walking towards something real. I had left Dubai behind, with its blinding lights and empty promises. I had left the money, the expensive dresses, the false names I used to be someone. But I had also left a piece of myself, the broken one, the one that carried shame and pain. I didn't know who I was yet, but I felt I was starting to discover it. I arrived at my mother's house in a simple neighborhood in a quiet suburb of Atlanta. The house was small, with worn walls and a yard where apple trees grew. Mom, Mrs. Anderson, welcomed me with open arms, but her eyes held questions she didn't dare to ask. She had aged with wrinkles that told the years we didn't share. She hugged me tight, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the warmth of a love that asked nothing in return. But I also felt guilt. For years I ignored her letters, her calls, her prayers. I later learned that she never stopped praying for me, 13 years straight, even when she didn't know if I was alive. That love broke me, but it also healed me. The first few days were strange. I didn't know how to be Eleanor without the lights, without the makeup, without the noise of the world. I looked in the mirror and saw the scar on my neck, the reminder of the cancer that almost took me. But I also saw something new in my eyes, a spark that wasn't there before. I started going to a small church near home. At first, I went out of curiosity, because the songs and the words reminded me of the videos I saw in Dubai. But soon, it became my refuge. There, no one knew me as the famous model, or as the woman who had sold her body. I was just Eleanor, a child of God seeking a path. One day, the pastor spoke to me about baptism. He said it was like dying and being born again. Leaving the past behind and starting clean. Felt a knot in my stomach, but also a certainty I couldn't explain. I wanted that. I wanted to leave behind the shame, the pain, the dark nights. I was baptized in a river, with the sun shining and the cold water running over my skin. I remember the birds singing, the murmur of the water, and the feeling that something heavy was leaving me. When I came out of the river, I cried, but not from sadness. It was as if for the first time I was free. But freedom wasn't easy. There were nights when the memories returned like ghosts. I remembered the streets of New York, the cold that cut through my skin. I remembered the men in Dubai, their hands, their stares. I remembered the drugs, the tarot, the emptiness that was eating me alive. And I wondered if I could really leave all that behind. I talked to God as if he were a friend. I asked him, "Why did you let me fall so low? Why didn't you stop me?" But in my heart, I began to understand that every fall, every mistake had brought me here. It wasn't a punishment. It was a path. Little by little, I began to rebuild my life. I had no money, no fame, but I had something new. Purpose. I started studying, reading, learning how to help others. I trained as a therapist because I wanted to understand the human heart, the pain we all carry. I also became an image consultant, but not to teach women to be beautiful on the outside, but to help them find their worth within. I started giving talks, telling my story, though at first my voice trembled. I spoke of the girl from Harmony, Creek, of the model who touched the sky and fell to hell, of the woman who found God at the bottom of the pit. And every time I spoke, I saw eyes that glittered, hands that reached out to me, hearts that understood. My family also changed. My brother Samuel was the first to draw close to God, long before me. He was the one who brought my parents to church, and when I returned, they were already different. Dad, who used to grunt at my dreams, now listened to me with pride. Mom, who had always been quiet, told me how her prayers followed me around the world. We gathered on Sundays, eating apples under the apple tree in the yard, laughing like we hadn't when I was a child. That love, which I sought so much on runways and in hotels, was there, waiting for me. But not everything was perfect. There were days when the past weighed on me. I received messages from old acquaintances, invitations to return to the fashion world. Some offered money, contracts, things that would have been my dream before. But they weren't anymore. Every time I doubted, I closed my eyes and remembered the dream in Dubai, the peace I felt. And I said no. I chose to stay in Atlanta, work with women who, like me, sought healing. I chose to be Eleanor, not the model, not the star, but the woman God had saved. As the days turned into months, my dears, I began to feel that my life had a new meaning. Atlanta, with its vibrant streets and the hum of city life, became my home in a way Harmony Creek never had been. I worked as a therapist, listening to stories of women who, like me, carried deep wounds. Some had lost their children. Others had been betrayed. Many felt alone. And I, who had walked the edge of the abyss, understood them. Every session was like a mirror. Their pains reminded me of mine, but they also showed me how far I had come. The sound of their voices, sometimes trembling, sometimes brave, was like music that made me feel alive. I also gave talks, something I never imagined doing. At first, I was nervous. Going on stage without expensive makeup or sparkling dresses, just with my truth, was terrifying. But when I spoke, the words flowed. I told about the girl who dreamed in Harmony Creek, about the cold nights in New York, about the false gold of Dubai. I didn't hide anything. Not the drugs, nor the prostitution, nor the times I wanted to give up. And when I reached the moment I knelt and cried out to God, I saw tears in people's eyes. They weren't tears of pity. They were of hope. Because if I, who had fallen so low, could rise, they could too. My work as an image consultant was different from what I did before. It wasn't about teaching women to be beautiful for others, but about helping them see themselves as God saw them. I talked to them about the beauty that doesn't fade with years, the one that comes from the heart. I remember a girl, Mary, who came to me with shattered self-esteem. She had been a model, like me, and had fallen into the same dark world. When she told me her story, I felt like I was listening to my own. I hugged her tightly, and together we cried. I told her, "You are not what you did. You are greater than your mistakes." And seeing her smile, weeks later, was like a gift from heaven. But don't think everything was easy. The past has a way of calling to you, like a voice whispering in the night. I received emails from old agents, messages from men I met in Dubai, invitations to events that promised money and fame. Once, a producer offered me a role in a movie, something that would have been my dream years ago. He told me, "Eleanor, you're still young. You can shine again." I felt a knot in my stomach. A part of me, small but real, wanted to say yes. I wanted to feel the lights again, hear the applause. But then I remembered the emptiness, the bitter taste of the drugs, the shame I carried. I closed my eyes and asked for strength. And always, I felt that peace I had found in Dubai, the one that told me I no longer needed those things. My family was my anchor. On Sundays, we gathered at Mom's house. Dad, who now smiled more, cut apples from the tree in the yard. Mom prepared a delicious pot roast, and the smell filled the house, mixing with laughter. Samuel, my brother, brought his guitar and played songs we all sang. Those moments were simple, but to me they were worth more than any runway. We talked about everything, the old days, the mistakes, how God had changed our lives. Dad, who once didn't understand my dreams, now listened with pride when I spoke of my work. Mom took my hand and said, "I always knew you'd come back, daughter." And I, who had run so far seeking love, found it there, at that table full of laughter and apples. But there were also dark days. Sometimes I dreamed of Dubai, of the parties, of the tarot cards. I woke up sweating with a racing heart, wondering if I had truly left everything behind. I talked to the church pastor, a simple man with kind eyes. He told me, "Eleanor, the past doesn't define who you are. Every day is a new opportunity." And I believed him. But sometimes I needed to remind myself. I read the Bible, which I no longer hid under the bed. The verses were like a balm, as if someone was speaking directly to my heart. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil," one said. And I repeated it when fear returned. I started writing my story, not to publish it, but to understand it. Every word was like taking a stone from my chest. I wrote about the girl who wanted to fly, about the woman who got lost, about the Eleanor who was being born. And as I wrote, I saw how every step, even the darkest ones, had been part of a larger plan. I don't justify my mistakes, no. What I did was wrong, and I will carry that guilt always. But I also know that God used even my falls to bring me here. And that, my dears, is what gives me strength to continue. Over time, my dears, my life became a living testimony. Not because I sought it, but because the wounds I carried transformed into bridges for others. In Atlanta, my work as a therapist and speaker began to grow. It wasn't just because of the techniques I learned, but because of the truth I shared. Every time I spoke, whether in a small church or a crowded hall, I felt that my story stopped being just mine. The women who listened to me, with eyes full of tears or shy smiles, found an echo of their own pains in my words. And I, who had spent years feeling alone, discovered that my loneliness had been preparation to connect with them. Once after a talk, a young woman approached. Her name was Anna. She was barely 20, but her eyes seemed older, as if they carried too many sleepless nights. She told me she had been in a world similar to mine, selling her body to survive. "I don't know if I can get out of this," she whispered, her voice broken. I took her hands and felt her trembling, as if I were holding the Eleanor of years ago. I told her how I knelt in Dubai, how I cried out to God, how I found a way when I thought there was no way out. "You are not alone, Anna," I told her, "and you are not what you did." Months later, she wrote me a letter. She had left that world, was studying, had found a church. "Thank you for showing me it's possible," she wrote. "I kept that letter like a treasure because it reminded me why I kept going. My story began to spread by word of mouth. I was invited to other cities, to radio shows, even to a local TV channel. At first, I felt out of place. I, who had walked runways under bright lights, now spoke on humble stages, in a simple dress with graying hair. But it was there, in the simplicity, where I felt most myself. I told of Harmony Creek, of the cold of New York, of the false lights of Dubai. I didn't hide the drugs, nor the prostitution, nor the cancer that made me face death. And every time I spoke, I saw how people came closer, not to applaud me, but to share their own struggles. It was as if my truth gave them permission to be honest. My family was part of this new chapter. Mom, who now walked slower, came to some of my talks. She sat in the front row, with a smile that made me feel like the child she used to hug. Once after a conference, she told me, "Daughter, your mistakes were great, but your return was even greater." Her words stayed with me, because they were true. Dad, who had learned to talk more over the years, helped me organize my travels. "You're a source of pride, Eleanor," he would say, and I, who had spent years seeking his approval, felt that I finally had it. Samuel, my brother, recorded some of my talks and uploaded them online. "People need to hear this," he would say, and he was right. The videos reached people I never met, in places I never visited. But what struck me most were the nights at home, when everything was silent. I sat in the yard, under the apple tree, with my Bible in my hands. I read the verses that had saved me, those that spoke of a God who never gives up, who seeks the lost. And I reflected on my life. Why did I have to fall so low? Why was the path so long and dark? I don't have all the answers, but I believe that every step, even the most painful ones, was necessary. My pain taught me empathy, my mistakes taught me humility, and my emptiness taught me that only God can fill the heart. There were moments when I looked up at the sky and talked to him, as if he were sitting beside me. I thanked him for not letting go, even when I ignored him. I asked him for strength to continue, because sharing my story wasn't easy. Every time I spoke of Dubai, of the nights I sold my body, I felt a pang of shame. But I also felt a strength that told me, keep going, because this isn't for you, it's for them. And so I did. Every talk, every therapy session, every hug to a broken woman was a way of giving back what I had received. Sometimes I wondered what my life would have been like if I hadn't left Harmony Creek, if I hadn't chased dreams that burned me. Perhaps it would have been simpler, with fewer scars. But then I looked at the people I helped, at Anna, at so many others, and I understood that my story, with all its pain, had a purpose. I wouldn't change anything, my dears. Not the cold nights, nor the tears, nor the scar on my neck that I still feel when I run my hand over it, because all of that brought me here, to this yard under the apple tree, to this life that, though imperfect, is true. My dears, the years passed like the wind, and with them, my life settled into a rhythm I never imagined. Atlanta became my refuge, a place where the smell of the city and the distant hum of traffic reminded me that I was home. My work as a therapist and speaker grew more than I expected. It wasn't just a job, it was my calling. Every day, I arrived at my small office, with blue-painted walls and a softly buzzing fan, and sat with women seeking healing. Their stories were different, but their pains were the same ones I knew. Loneliness, shame, fear. And I, who had walked through those dark valleys, guided them with the firm hand of someone who knows there is light at the end. The talks became more frequent. I traveled across the United States, sometimes to other countries, bringing my story to churches, schools, community centers. I spoke on large and small stages, but always with the same truth. I told of the girl who dreamed in Harmony Creek, of the nights I got lost in New York, of the false lights that almost consumed me in Dubai. I didn't soften the details because I knew that the truth, however raw, was what touched hearts. I spoke of the cancer, of the night I challenged God, of the dream that gave me peace, and each time I saw people stand up, applaud, approach with tears and hugs. They weren't applauding Eleanor, the model, but the woman who had survived to tell her story. One of the most striking experiences was in Los Angeles, at a center for women who had left prostitution. When I went on stage, I saw tired faces, but also hopeful ones. I told them everything, unfiltered. The parties in Dubai, the hands I didn't want to remember, the money that couldn't buy peace. When I finished, an older woman, with white hair and rough hands, approached. "You're like me, daughter," she said. "I thought my life was worthless, but now I see that I can start over." I hugged her tightly and felt the smell of simple soap on her clothes, the warmth of her skin. That hug was worth more than any crown I won. My family continued to be my anchor. Mom, who now used a cane, came home on weekends. We sat under the apple tree, and she told me stories of her youth, things she had never shared before. She told me about her own dreams, how she gave them up to raise us. "I wasn't the best mother, Eleanor," she said once, her eyes moist, "but I never stopped loving you." I took her hand and told her I knew that her prayers had saved me. Dad, who had learned to laugh more, joined us with his coffee, telling jokes that made Mom roll her eyes. Samuel, my brother, continued recording my talks, and now had his own family, with 2 children who called me Grandma Eleanor, though I wasn't. Those simple moments, with the sound of leaves rustling in the wind and the sweet taste of apples, were my treasure. I thought about how I had run through the world seeking love, and now I had it here, at a table full of laughter and memories. But I also knew that my story wasn't just for my family. It was for the Annas, the Marys, the nameless women who listened to my words and found courage to continue. Every letter I received, every message, every hug after a talk, reminded me that my pain had been transformed into purpose. Sometimes I sat alone in my room, with the Bible open on my knees, and reflected on everything. I wondered why God let me go so far, why He allowed me to fall so low. But then I remembered a verse I liked. "All things work together for good, for those who love God." My life, with its mistakes and scars, was proof of that. I wouldn't change anything, my dears. Not the nights I cried in New York, nor the times I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize myself, nor the scar on my neck that I still feel when I run my hand over it. All of that made me who I am, and gave me the tools to help others. There were days when the past still hurt. I dreamed of Dubai, of the sound of clinking glasses, of the tarot cards that promised answers. I woke up with a racing heart, wondering if I would ever be completely free. But then I opened my Bible, read a psalm, and felt that peace that had found me at the bottom of the pit. I talked to God as if He were sitting beside me, and I told Him, "Thank you for not letting go. Thank you for using even my mistakes." And I felt that He smiled, like a father who knows his daughter finally understood. My work grew so much that I started training other women to be therapists, to carry hope like me. I taught them to listen, not to judge, to see the value in every person. And they, with their own stories, followed the path, as if my testimony had lit a spark that wouldn't go out. I looked at all this and felt gratitude, a gratitude so great that sometimes it made me cry. I had found my place, not on runways, not in tall buildings, but in the hearts I touched with my truth. My dears, now that I look back, with white hair and hands marked by the years, I feel that my life is like a book with many torn pages, but with an ending that shines. Today, sitting in my yard in Atlanta, under the apple tree that still bears fruit, I think of everything I lived. The dusty streets of Harmony Creek, the cold that cut my skin in New York, the false lights of Dubai, the scar on my neck that I still touch sometimes. All of that seems distant, as if it happened to another Eleanor, but I know it was me, and every step, every tear brought me here to this peace I wouldn't trade for anything. My work as a therapist and speaker became my legacy. It's not just about helping women heal. It's about showing them that there's no wound that can't close, no past that can't be transformed. I've seen so many find their way. Anna, who now leads a group for women in Los Angeles. Mary, who opened a small shop and sings in church. And so many others whose names I hold in my heart. Each one is like a seed I planted, not by my strength, but by the strength God gave me. The sound of their laughter, their hugs after a talk, the smell of coffee we share in meetings. All of that is my reward, more valuable than any crown I won. My family continues to be my refuge. Mom is no longer with us. She passed away a few years ago, with a peaceful smile, as if she knew her work here was done. I miss her every day, but I feel her love in the wind that rustles the apple tree leaves. Dad, with his jokes and his coffee, still comes on Sundays. Though he walks slower, Samuel and his children fill the house with noise and joy. The children ask me to tell them stories, but not of runways or distant cities, but of how I found God. And I tell them, in simple words, about the man in the white robe who gave me peace, about the river where I was baptized, about the yard where I learned to truly love. Sometimes they ask me if I regret anything, and I'm honest. Yes, I regret the choices I made, the times I sold my body, the nights I sought answers in empty things. But I wouldn't change my story, because every mistake was a lesson, every fall a step towards the light. My life isn't perfect, my dears. There are still days when the past whispers, when I dream of Dubai and wake up with a racing heart. But then I open my Bible, read a psalm, and remember that I'm not alone. I have God, I have my family, I have the women I help, and I have this peace that money and fame can't explain. I've learned things they don't teach in schools. That true love isn't in the lights, but in simple moments, like sharing an apple with someone you love. That pain, though it hurts, can be a teacher if you let it. That no person is so lost that they cannot be found. My story, with its shadows and its light, is proof of that. That's why I keep speaking, writing, hugging. I want every woman who feels broken to know that there is hope, that there is a God who never gives up, that there is a way, even in the darkest night. Now, in my 70s, I look to the future with gratitude. I don't know how many days I have left, but I want to live them well, with an open heart, with hands ready to help. I plan to write a book, not to become famous, but so my story can reach more people. I want to travel to other countries, not to walk runways, but to bring hope. And I want to stay here, in Atlanta, under my apple tree, with my Bible and my memories, thanking God every day for the life I have. If they ask me what message I would leave, I would say this: no matter how far you've fallen, no matter how broken you feel, there is a love that seeks you, a purpose that awaits you. I found it at the bottom of the pit when I cried out to God, and He answered. And if I, who touched the sky and fell to hell, could rise, you can too. So keep going, my dears. Keep going, because your story doesn't end until God says so, and He always has a better ending than you imagine.